So the topic of today is Kamen Sentai GoRider, a three-part web series that aired as both a spin-off to Kamen Rider Ex-Aid, as well as the crossover movie Chou, Super Hero Taisen, which is a series of movies that cross over both the Super Sentai and the Kamen Rider. Now for my first attempt at a Tokusatsu review on the new channel, I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on the backstory and everything of the Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, etc., just what's relevant to the actual topic at hand. But first, just a quick point out as well that giveaways are done on every one of my videos now. They're at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that afterwards. And because this is a Tokusatsu review and not a gaming review, the one on Final Fantasy 15 still stands and you can enter that too. Right, moving on. Kamen Sentai GoRider, obviously Mask Task Force GoRiders. The 5 characters themselves, obviously based on the standard 5 lineup Super Sentai, in this case with their designs being based on the original Kamen Rider number 1 and 2, more specifically 2. GoRiders are interesting enough as characters themselves because they absolutely mean nothing to this movie. If anything, the GoRiders' presence is just as a means to sell toys as well as market the Chou Super Hero Taisen film itself, even though this canonically takes place after the film itself. The GoRiders introduces upgrade cards for Ex-Aid in the film, return here in that form for the big battle at the end of the film, and serve no purpose outside of that. Their presence, as well as the title and everything as part of the film, is purely marketing based, and because it bears no respect, I can only assume the reason for their inclusion, and the title for the web series itself is purely as a way of actually achieving the budget necessary to make this. For all intensive purposes, this is a series that perhaps should have been a straight to DVD video, or V-Cinema as they're known in Japan, and I think it's important that something like that should have happened, because when this happened with Kamen Rider Double, XL and the Eternal movies that released some years back, they went straight to DVD and featured very little on the marketing for actual extra toys, although still obviously had some for a degree. In this case, however, the GoRiders seemed there for just that reason and serve no other purpose to the plot, and just generally are there for the action and to use up what little budget this seems to have overall. But let's talk about Ex-Aid. Kamen Rider Ex-Aid is the latest and currently ongoing series of Kamen Rider. In my opinion, it is one of the best series of Kamen Rider I've seen in a while, and it manages to juggle both respect for its two main subject areas, that being gaming and gaming in general, as well as surgery and the medical profession, something that you wouldn't think marries very well, but when you look at it from the perspective of surgeons and naturally good gamers, because of the dexterity it takes using their fingers and their brains and to think on their feet and have quick reactions to everything, it actually makes for a surprisingly very well thought crossover between the two ideas. Throughout the first half of the series so far, Ex-Aid has proven itself to be both deep and very ideological in what it does, but also extremely well thought out in its plot and respect of these two things marrying together for both entertaining series, both action and story wise, as well as actually having some crazy set piece designs and allusions to both famous surgeons and more so famous games on top of that as well. But let's get back into GoRiders themselves. The story of GoRiders being a 3-parter focuses naturally on the standard 3-arc structure. It starts off with Hojo Emu, who is Kamen Rider Ex-Aid, waking up in a theme park like structure isolated in the middle of nowhere. There's no one around and he's very much on his own, with no history or anything shown to show what happened as a precursor to this, and his own memory seems to be fuzzy on it himself. He keeps getting weird flashes to things that are assumed to be something of the past, or maybe some sort of future echo that's coming into him as well, but he doesn't yet know, and finds himself guided by static objects placed around the park that take him to a small room with some candles on the table, and he's greeted by Poppy, who's another character from the main Ex-Aid series, although in this case purely in name only, because she seems to be someone completely different from the actual person and just played by the same actress for happenstance. He questions where he is and what's happening, but the fake Poppy doesn't seem to be able to give any simple answers, very much nice and accommodating until she's finished talking and then storms off in a very robotic-like nature. Poppy isn't really intrinsic to this, so I'm not going to cover her anymore. So suffice to say, she's just a host for this little area of the plot and does nothing more. But it's not long until Ex-Aid is joined by someone else when one of the candles on the table comes to light. Kamen Rider another Agito, or Kino Karu, from obviously the Kamen Rider Agito series, appears first and very distraught. A Kamen Rider who died in his respective series, and this is something that's going to go on to be a trend with these other cameo riders appearing, naturally, like Ex-Aid, is somewhat curious about where he is. However, he's more of a shoot first and ask questions later kind of of guy, and this leads to a fight early on between the characters, which quickly amps up the plot when Kamen Rider Blade, or Kazuma Kenzaki, appears to actually stop the fighting between the two and return them to the table where they actually start to talk about the situation. It's not long before they're joined by other Kamen Riders, Kamen Rider Baron and Kamen Rider Malika, who are both from Kamen Rider Gaim, and finalising the team of 5 we're getting for this special Kamen Rider Lazer, the very own Kiryu Yuko, who died earlier in the Kamen Ex-Aid one as well, and has been something of a hick for Ex-Aid as well as his main plot for motivation throughout the series after his death. And this is where the 3-episode part starts to hit its main structure. They realise that the common link between these 5 riders is that they're very much all dead, with the exception of Blade, obviously, who's as good as dead, being undead himself. You see, Kamen Rider Ex-Aid may well be dead as well, which is something of a bit of a crux between him and Lazer. Lazer died and asked Ex-Aid to carry on his legacy, and with Ex-Aid potentially dead, it leads to an interesting dynamic between the two, as much as it does the other riders as well, as they realise that they've all passed on from what their original goals were, and they've all had to make peace with death. And now here they are again, very much alive in some form, but trapped into this little area with no reason or explanation as to why. And it makes for the first arc of the show to really have these characters just move around and discuss and talk about their deaths. Yoko Minato, Kamen Rider Mariko, was very much attached to Baron in that she believed it was her job to witness his destiny. His destiny is done now, he's dead, she's dead, and what do they do to move on from there? Another Agito as well is someone who needs to move on from what his original ideals were. Kazuma Kenzaki, Kamen Rider Blade, is very much the balancing act, he's the only one who really supports Ex-Aid to start off with. As to end the first episode, all 5 riders henshin together and actually go after Ex-Aid, thinking that the reason he seems to have memories of all of them in some form is something that makes him potentially the person who set all this up in the first place, and all go after him, hoping that it will either sort out their situation or help him regain his lost memories. The first episode is very much removed from Kamen Rider Ex-Aid as the show, but the second episode in the series very much puts it back into that territory. Ex-Aid's able to work out that the area they're in is actually a game area, a physical game that they've somehow ended up inside. All the rules of the world seem to bend to that logic, with characters appearing, everything being reset, and it leads them to finally unite in one common purpose, like the Shocker, who keeps attacking them through various fights throughout the first 2 episodes. This all ends great when they finally team up and work together, only for Kamen Rider Blade, which is hinted at earlier, to stab Ex-Aid and cause his death at the end of the second episode, with a little post-episode hook that Ex-Aid wakes up in the real world and finds out that both Kamen Rider Brave and Kamen Rider Snipe are fighting in the real world for a big army of enemies that seems to constantly respawn and seems to be no ending, and the only way to do it is for Ex-Aid to go back into this game and find a way to actually beat it. The crux of that is doing so wipes his memory, and this whole situation has been a constant retread of go after go trying to clear the game, which Ex-Aid hasn't been able to do. This is the crux of the plot. This is why he seems to know things have happened before. They have, many times, and he's constantly failed, never making any progress in the game. And this is how the second episode ends. The third episode starts very much with a bigger situation, because we know everything that's happening outside of the world of the game as well. Other Kamen Rider Ex-Aid characters are brought into the whole, and we see a bit more of the going on plot. It's not limited to just our interaction between the riders. Of course, there's also one little extra as well. Ex-Aid has managed to cheat the system. While the game has continued inside without him being there, he's been able to actually leave clues that have allowed him to work out that both Blade is a traitor, and in his most recent absence work out who Blade actually is. It's not Kazuma Kanzaki, it's actually Kuroto Dan, Kamen Rider Gem, who died earlier in Ex-Aid's series, and roasts little Game in order to revive him through making other riders who are dead come back to life and fight and lose in despair. It's all about taking riders who died, because they're the ones he has access to somehow, and making them despair even more, using that energy to make himself revive and finally go on to become a living being again outside of this world. But inside this game he is very much invincible, as both him and every other enemy can constantly respawn with no end in sight. Gem very much has the upper hand for most of this episode, until the real Kamen Rider Blade finally appears in a fantastically written scene that plays on the fact that the earlier plot hole of Blade not actually being truly dead is finally revealed here. The real Kazuma Kanzaki obviously very much isn't dead, and Gem just needed a random rider who no one could locate to take the place of in the game and assume the identity of. However, things didn't quite go to plan. Posing as Kamen Rider Blade was all well and good until Gem used undead abilities, something else that Kamen Rider Blade also does. Now through that, the real Kazuma Kanzaki was able to find them playing the game and asked to go in as well to back up Ex-Aid. He does, with that stunning realisation that Gem has ultimately won. However, the big plot hole of Kazuma Kanzaki being undead the whole time, and the actual lore of the Kamen Rider Blade series, is that of the main enemies of that series, the undead, if the last undead to survive was the Joker, then the world would collapse and die, and that's exactly what happens. Gem returns from the dead collecting enough despair to actually manifest again, and that leaves Kazuma Kanzaki in the game world the only surviving undead, and the game collapses in a quite well written scene that makes use of all those plot holes up until that point and really pays them off. And this is when we get the big finale of the miniseries, something that goes a bit too crazy on the effects, but we finally see our 6 riders, the full true 6 riders, fighting together and using their abilities to take down Gaim, which doesn't go as planned. He's still very much invincible and no one seems to have the strength to take him down, not even when they work together. This is when the GoRiders come into play, as Ex-Aid draws the cards that he obtained in the film and throws them to our 5 riders, who transform and are able to finally kill Gaim and the rest of the army. That's pretty much it for what we see of the GoRiders, and then it goes back into the main plot where we finally see our 4 actual dead riders sacrificing themselves to take down Gaim, while both Kamen Rider Ex-Aid and Kamen Rider Blade are able to escape, and that's effectively the end of the miniseries. As I said earlier, the miniseries itself is hugely enjoyable because it chooses to focus on something that no real Rider series or spin-off or Super Sentai has been able to do before, and that's both on dead riders but also the actual coming to terms with death. Something that's very much in the style of Ex-Aid itself, which likes to have its dark plotline, but the idea of the medical profession being a main theme of Ex-Aid means that death is something that all surgeons and all medical staff have to deal with on some level, and while that perhaps was just too dark an idea or not something they could really structure a good action-packed weekly series around, using it for the basis of this actual 3-part series was a brilliant idea. Naturally, of course, the inclusion of GoRiders is because that idea in itself doesn't allow for much action, and as well as bringing back past characters, which means that there's very little on the side of actual toy marketing or new toy marketing they can do, and so furthering the GoRiders from the Chou Super Hero Taisen film seemed like a great way to go about this, and its inclusion I can understand just because it got us the budget that made us this 3-parter in the first place if they couldn't have just made it a straight to DVD thing. And so we have our main 6, although ultimately main 9 Kamen Riders that appear in this special overall. Obviously Ex-Aid never really gets much development overall, as he's not the focus, he's just the proxy for this big adventure. It's all about both Kamen Riders and the Agito, Baron, Malika and Lazer. Kazuma Kanzaki Kamen Rider Blade doesn't really have much development, and he's more there to make sure the plot keeps moving when he's being impersonated, and when he's actually there he's the one that breaks them all out of this, but there's no actual development for him as a character. Obviously another Agito has to deal with his death, as well as Kamen Rider Baron, who was originally making a play to actually control the world, and then obviously in this has to grow to actually accept a team of people working with him. Kamen Rider Malika has to work out what her new purpose in life or death is now. Obviously with just following Baron around beforehand was great in her first life, but in this new world, what was her purpose? That was the whole question of it. And obviously Kamen Rider Lazer, Kiryakuja, who was very much someone who had his big arc during the first 11 episodes of Kamen Rider Ex-Aid anyway, but this brings into question of when you die and you leave your legacy to someone else, what happens if that person fails you? What happens if they're not able to carry on their legacy? The potential idea that Ex-Aid had died as well when they were both dead together was somewhat haunting to him, as was the fact that Kamen Rider Gaim was in control of everything the whole time. The man who killed him again brought him back to watch him die over and over again, so that despair could make him stronger. It was something that hit him perhaps harder than any other rider in this series, and something that I thought was handled extremely well. Obviously Kamen Rider Brave and Kamen Rider Snipe appear, but they're in no way really relevant to this plot other than showing that they're making a big last stand outside of the game world. And Kamen Rider Gaim, who obviously appears in the final episode as the main villain, ultimately masterminding the whole thing. Who else was it going to be except for Kuroto Dan? In a world where it's all dead Kamen Riders come back to life, naturally he would too, being someone who was equally undead for most of his part of Ex-Aid. And of course that's not to say this special wasn't without its few plot holes, and the biggest one I can think of, other than the Blade one, which is obviously the main point of the show, is that it showed that Kamen Rider Ex-Aid has redone this game world several times to try and work out what to do and how to beat the game. What happened to the other 4 riders? Did they die each time, reset along with their memories, or does it carry on? Because the time we actually see Ex-Aid coming back, he comes back when the other riders remember who he is, and I do wonder if that's just simply because they were able to last longer without him this time than they had any other time in the past. So overall, what do we say about the actual show outside of its plot? Well, the action's pretty good, and it's all based around these old riders using their skills and working together. We get a hefty lot of fan service because of this, but we don't get so much on the effects side to go with it. Stock effects that we use as part of their old shows are normally easy to just reuse for shows like this, but I'd guess that even the budget didn't extend to actually rendering these extra effects, because we get a lot of simple things that were included as part of the old series, like the Fruit Ninja special effects that were used for the Kamen Rider Gaim belts when they were doing their special attacks, that while we hear the sound effects of, we see actual no visual indicators to see what they're doing for them, which we used to get when they were slicing the fruit in the original series. The series as a whole makes good use of camera editing there, especially in the scenes where they're just talking. There is a hefty dosage of unrealness added by the fact that they constantly use Dutch angles, but given that these are all dead characters talking to each other, I find that quite eerie and effective given the situation. Ultimately, the effects are limited because of the budget affecting everything. There's not much of a budget because we're only trying to show off the GoRiders, and they only appear in the final episode. Ultimately, I want to compare this to something like the Axel movie, something that perhaps did this slightly better, with allowing to have a darker subject matter, but based around getting a bigger budget by selling it to DVD. There's not so much money in showing a web series other than marketing the content that's shown within. And I think that this shouldn't have been a web series, but more a one big special on a DVD. It's a big marketing push for the show as a whole, as well as the movie that inspired it, and I hope that its legacy beyond that stays in the fandom, because this is perhaps one of the best little spin-offs we've had of Kamen Rider and Super Hero Taisen as a whole. I really like Ex-Aid anyway, and I think that it's certainly something you want to check out, but obviously if you've seen any of the TV series the Legacy Riders appear from, you're certainly going to love this little three-parter that really honours these characters in a way that not many other spin-offs do. The Super Hero Taisen films that have had previous characters come back generally feel like they're almost different characters, although they don't honour any of their old mannerisms or even their own plot or story arcs, and yet this one does. It addresses them up front, and it puts them front and centre for a proper discussion about the death of our heroes in the past, and it's really well done. Ultimately, Kamen Sentai GoRiders is an absolutely brilliant little piece that I highly recommend you watch if you have a love of Kamen Rider in general. So download it, it's really good. It's an hour and a half of really well written Kamen Rider drama, so check it out. And again, thanks for watching, and obviously as this is Kamen Rider Ex-Aid related to this video, the giveaway for this video is a Kamen Rider Ex-Aid print, as you can see, and the link is in the description for if you want to enter and win that. As normal, all giveaways are worldwide and you can win from anywhere, so just sign up, follow me on Twitter and retweet the little thing in the giveaway, and you're all good to go and enter. And you can enter the Final Fantasy 15 one as well from the last video I did on that. So, as always, thank you for watching. I'd love it if you could subscribe and support me further and share anything you liked. Just leave a comment, do anything. Just let me know what you think of these things, because I'm trying to make them better, and I'm not going to ultimately if I just don't get better. So, leave a comment and help me out, and see you next time.